The Alien Council studied humanity for 11 years and reached one verdict: unfit, not incapable, unqualified, by every measure 6,000 years of galactic precedent could offer. So she asked for the shortest trial ever granted and gave herself just 30 days to prove an entire species wrong. If you love stories where humanity gets underestimated and comes back swinging, hit subscribe, because this channel is built on exactly that. New HFY sagas drop regularly, and you don't want to miss what happens when the unqualified species finally gets a chance to prove itself. The Grand Chamber of the Threndal Compact had not seated a human petitioner in its 400-year history, and by the time Dr. Amara Okafor finished walking the long processional aisle toward the council dais, she understood exactly why. 9 species sat in judgment above her, arranged in ascending tiers of light and shadow: the crystalline Visari with their slow-blinking facete eyes, the towering Kargvote war clerics wrapped in ceremonial chain, the pale telepathic Ilian twins who spoke in unison and never separately, and above them all, seated at the chamber's apex, the 9 elders of the Threndal Compact itself, the body that decided which species were permitted to hold stewardship over a world and which were not. Earth's petition had taken 11 years to reach this room. Dr. Okafor, the presiding elder's voice carried, without amplification, a resonance that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than any single throat. You stand before this council as your species nominee for stewardship of the Kess Reclamation Zone. Before we hear your case, you should understand, this council has already voted. Amara's stomach dropped. Voted? Before hearing me speak? A formality remains. The elder continued, unmoved. But the outcome is not in doubt. 7 species have submitted petitions for the Kess Zone in the past century. 6 were granted stewardship. 1, the Threndal Collective, was rejected for ecological negligence discovered only after their tenure began. We do not intend to make that error twice. Your species has held spaceflight for 140 years. The Threndal held it for 6,000 before their failure. If 6 millennia of experience could not prevent catastrophic mismanagement, 1 century cannot possibly qualify you to succeed where they did not. A ripple of assent moved through the tiered seats, clicking mandibles, humming crystal, the soft telepathic murmur of the Ilian. The council finds humanity unfit for stewardship, the elder said, not from malice, but from mathematics. You are children asking to steer a vessel built for elders. We will not hand you a world to ruin. Amara felt 11 years of preparation, of sleepless nights and impossible diplomacy, compress into a single point of fury she did not let reach her face. Then give me the standard probationary term, she said. 30 days. If I fail to demonstrate viable stewardship in that time, you may reject humanity's petition permanently, and I will not contest it again. The chamber went silent. No species had ever requested the shortest trial on record, the one reserved, in Threndal precedent, for petitioners the council expected to embarrass themselves fastest. The presiding elder's facete eyes narrowed with something between curiosity and pity. The Kess Reclamation Zone was, by every metric the council valued, a corpse of a world. 6,000 years of Threndal mismanagement had left its atmosphere thick with industrial haze, its oceans acidified past the threshold most species considered survivable, and its surface dotted with abandoned megastructures too vast and too poisoned to demolish. It was the kind of assignment that looked, on paper, like a punishment dressed up as an opportunity, and Amara suspected the council had chosen it precisely because no 30-day miracle was supposed to be possible there. She arrived with a skeleton team, an atmospheric chemist, 2 ecological engineers, a translator fluent in 4 dead Threndal dialects, and a drone swarm barely larger than what most council species would consider a survey kit. The Kargvote observer assigned to monitor her, a war cleric named Dresk Ironholt, 7 feet of scarred chitin and barely concealed contempt, made no effort to hide his opinion of her chances. The Threndal brought 40,000 engineers to this world across 2 centuries of active remediation, he said, watching her team unload equipment that would have fit in one of his transport's cargo holds. You have brought 5. The Threndal also spent 6,000 years assuming bigger was better, Amara said, not looking up from her tablet. We're going to try something else. And what is that? Listening to the planet instead of fighting it. Dresk made a sound that translated, roughly, as a laugh with teeth in it. By the end of the first week, his contempt had curdled into something closer to bewilderment. Amara's team wasn't attempting to scrub the atmosphere or neutralize the oceans. The Dral had tried both at catastrophic cost and failed. Instead, they were mapping the handful of native microbial strains that had survived the poisoning, isolating the ones showing resistance, and seeding them, patiently, in a widening ring around 3 test sites no larger than a city block each. "This is not remediation," Dresk said, watching a swarm of gene-modified cyanobacteria bloom faint green across a stretch of dead coastline. "This is gardening." "Yes," Amara said. "That's exactly what it is." She did not tell him yet that gardening, done correctly, was the only thing that had ever actually healed a wounded world, because she wasn't sure, at 7 days in, that she could prove it before the Council 30 ran out. By the 11th day, the first test site had turned a color no one on the Kess zone had seen in 6,000 years, green. Not the sickly, chemical-tinted green of Dral-era terraforming attempts, but the unmistakable, chaotic green of something actually alive and multiplying on its own terms. The cyanobacteria strains had done more than survive. They were feeding a second wave of native lichen analogues that had been presumed extinct, dormant spores waiting in the poisoned soil for chemistry that finally didn't kill them on contact. Dresk Ironholt stood at the edge of the test site with his translator device held out, running atmospheric readings for the 4th time that morning, as if the numbers might correct themselves into something he found more believable. "Oxygen output has risen 4% in this sector alone," he said, and for the first time since Amara had met him, there was no contempt in his voice. Only something wary, like a soldier recalculating an enemy's strength mid-battle. In 11 days, the Dral's most optimistic models projected a single % in a decade. The Dral were fighting the planet, Amara said, crouching to examine a cluster of pale new lichen with the careful reverence of someone handling something sacred. Big interventions, blunt force, brute engineering across a whole hemisphere at once. It's how most spacefaring species approach a problem. More power, more scale, more control. We tried something smaller. We found what was already trying to live here, and we got out of its way. That is not stewardship as the Compact defines it, Dresk said. Stewardship requires demonstrated mastery. Control. Maybe your definition is why the Dral needed 6,000 years to fail, Amara said, not unkindly. Mastery isn't always the same as control. Sometimes it's knowing when not to use the hammer you brought. Dresk said nothing to that, but Amara noticed he stopped filing his reports with the dismissive undertone they'd carried the first week. By day 11, his transmissions back to the Council had shifted from petitioner proceeding as expected to a phrase that made her allow herself, for the first time, a small flicker of hope. Petitioner's methodology diverges significantly from Compact precedent. Results require further observation. That night, alone in the survey outpost with the acid rain finally softening to something closer to ordinary weather outside, Amara pulled up the Council's 30-day countdown and did the math. 19 days left. And for the first time since Earth had ever heard of the Threndal Compact, one green square of coastline said this might actually be enough. The Council did not wait for day 30 to notice. On the 14th day, an unscheduled Threndal observation vessel dropped out of orbit above the Kess zone, not Dresk's modest transport, but a full Compact cruiser bearing the presiding Elder Zone seal. Amara watched it descend from the outpost's cracked viewport with the particular dread of someone who has learned that unscheduled visits from powerful institutions are rarely good news. They are not due to evaluate for 16 more days, Dresk said, already moving toward the airlock, his earlier contempt long since replaced by something closer to protective wariness. This is irregular. It was Elder Vestal Ninth Facet herself who emerged, not the presiding elder from the Grand Chamber, but close enough in rank that her arrival alone rewrote the stakes of everything happening on the ground. Her crystalline body caught the pale Kess sunlight in fractured rainbows as she surveyed the green test sites with an expression Amara had no framework to read. 4% oxygen increase in a sector the Dral's own surveys marked as chemically dead, Vestal said, without preamble. In under 2 weeks. Explain how this is possible, Dr. Okafor, and explain it precisely. Because if you are manufacturing these readings, the penalty for Compact fraud will end humanity's petition for every world in known space, not merely this one. Amara had expected accusations of failure. She had not expected to be accused of succeeding too well. "I'm not manufacturing anything," she said, keeping her voice level despite her pulse hammering. "You're welcome to run independent readings. Dresk has already been doing so daily. We didn't scrub the atmosphere or force new biology onto this world. We found what native life had survived 6,000 years of Draal remediation attempts, removed the chemical barriers keeping it dormant, and let it do what living things do when given the smallest chance. The Draal's own biologists concluded no viable native strains remained after the second millennium of their tenure. The Draal's biologists were looking for strains that could survive their remediation chemicals," Amara said. "We looked for strains that could survive without our interference." Different question. Different answer. Vestal was silent for a long moment, her facete eyes cycling through slow, deliberate refractions of light that Amara had come to recognize over 11 years of diplomacy as the visual signature of a mind being forced to reconsider something it had considered settled. 16 days remain in your trial," the elder said finally. "I will be watching personally. Do not disappoint me, Dr. Okafor, for your species' sake, and, I confess, for my own curiosities." Word of Elder Vestal's personal visit spread through the Compact's political circuits faster than any official transmission could have managed, and by day 18, the Kess Reclamation Zone had become the least private 30-day trial in Threndal history. Observer vessels from 4 other member species began arriving in staggered succession, not with the Council's authority to interfere, but with the unmistakable hunger of institutions that sensed a precedent about to be set and wanted a front-row seat regardless of which way it broke. The Visari sent a scientific delegation. The Ilian twins arrived in person, their unified telepathic presence unsettling even Dresk, who had grown almost fond of Amara's small, stubborn team over 3 weeks of daily proximity. "You have an audience now," Dresk told her, watching a Visari survey team catalog the spreading lichen fields with obsessive precision. "This changes the stakes." "It shouldn't change the work," Amara said, though she felt the pressure of it anyway. 11 years of Earth's diplomatic future compressed into eyes that had never expected to be watching a human succeed at anything. The work itself, by day 18, had outgrown even her own cautious projections. The original 3 test sites had merged into a single contiguous band of regrowth 11 kilometers wide, oxygen output climbing steadily, and, more unexpectedly, a handful of small native fauna species, presumed extinct for over 2 millennia, had begun reappearing at the green zone's edges. Amara's ecological engineers had photographed a burrowing creature the size of a house cat, pale-scaled and wide-eyed, blinking in daylight its ancestors hadn't seen in 2,000 years. The Ilian twins requested a private audience with her that evening, their voices arriving simultaneously in her mind with the eerie doubled cadence she still hadn't gotten used to. "You have not told the Council everything," they said. "We hear it in the shape of your silences. What are you not saying, Dr. Okafor?" Amara hesitated, then decided that 11 years of caution had earned her one honest gamble. "I'm not saying that this method will work everywhere," she admitted. "It worked here because the Draal, for all their failures, never fully sterilized the biosphere. They left just enough dormant life for us to work with. On a truly dead world, this approach fails completely. I'm not proving humanity has a universal solution. I'm proving we're willing to ask what a wounded world actually needs before deciding what to do to it." The twins were silent for a long moment, their doubled presence withdrawing slightly from her mind. "That," they said finally, "is a more dangerous claim than any of the Council realizes. You are not asking to be trusted with mastery. You are asking to be trusted with restraint. The Compact has never had to judge a species for that before." By day 26, the Kess Reclamation Zone's green band had grown to 40 kilometers, and the Compact cruiser in high orbit had stopped being a threat and started being, unmistakably, an audience. Amara stood at the edge of the original test site, now unrecognizable, thick with native lichen analogues and the first tentative saplings of something her botanist had started calling, unofficially, hope trees, and watched Elder Vestal Ninth Facet descend the cruiser's ramp for the second time in 12 days. This time, the presiding elder came with her. 4 days remain in your trial, the presiding elder said, its resonant voice carrying none of the flat certainty it had held in the Grand Chamber 3 weeks earlier. The Council has reviewed Elder Vestal's independent surveys 3 times, seeking the error in your methodology. We have not found one. You sound disappointed, Amara said, and immediately wondered if she'd overstepped. 11 years of diplomacy did not always survive contact with actual relief. Not disappointed, the elder said. Unsettled. This council has judged stewardship petitions for 400 years on a single, unspoken assumption that mastery over a world means the capacity to reshape it. Every species we have granted stewardship demonstrated that capacity. The Thrall held it in overwhelming excess, and it destroyed this world regardless. You have demonstrated something we have no precedent for evaluating. Restraint, Vesthal said quietly, echoing the word the Ilian twins had used in private 8 days earlier, a fact Amara suspected was not coincidental. She has demonstrated restraint as a form of mastery. The compact was not built to recognize that as qualification. It was built to reward force. Dresk Ironholt, standing slightly apart with the weathered patience of someone who had spent 3 weeks unlearning a lifetime of assumptions, spoke for the first time in the conversation. With respect, elders, perhaps that is precisely why the Thrall held this world for 6,000 years and still managed to kill it. Force was never the missing variable. Judgment was. The presiding elder turned its facete gaze on its own war cleric observer, and something passed between them that Amara couldn't read but recognized the weight of anyway, an institution's oldest assumptions cracking quietly in front of the people who'd built their careers on them. 4 days, the presiding elder said again, softer now. Finish what you started, Dr. Okafor. The council will render its verdict at the trial's true end, not before, but I will tell you plainly, because you have earned plain speech, you have already changed what this council will ask of every petitioner who comes after you. On the 30th day, the grand chamber of the Threndal Compact was fuller than it had been in a century. Amara Okafor walked the long processional aisle a second time, and the difference between this walk and the first was not lost on anyone watching. 9 species filled the tiered seats again, but this time the crystalline Vesari leaned forward instead of blinking with slow indifference, and the Kargvote war clerics, Dresk among them now, standing rather than seated, having requested formal witness status, watched with the alert stillness of soldiers who had seen something rewrite their understanding of strength. 30 days ago, the presiding elder said, this council declared humanity unfit for stewardship. We judged you by 6,000 years of precedent, and by every metric that precedent offered, our judgment was reasonable. Explain to this chamber, in your own words, why it was also wrong. Amara had rehearsed a dozen versions of this moment across 11 years of diplomacy. She used none of them. You judged us by what the Thrall proved a species could survive holding for 6,000 years, she said. Overwhelming force, applied for 6 millennia, still ended in catastrophic failure. Because force was never the variable that mattered. The Kess zone didn't need a steward who could reshape it. It needed one patient enough to ask what was already trying to survive, and humble enough to get out of its way. That's not mastery in the form your compact has ever measured. But it healed 40 kilometers of dead coastline in 30 days, which 6,000 years of your preferred definition of mastery never managed. Silence held the chamber for a long moment, not the silence of judgment already made, but the rarer, more dangerous silence of an institution actually deliberating. The council finds, the presiding elder said at last, that Dr. Amara Okafor has satisfied the terms of her trial. Stewardship of the Kess Reclamation Zone is granted to IF, effective immediately, on probationary review in 1 standard century, a time no petitioning species has received in 400 years of compact record, because no species has ever asked to be judged on so short a trial and won. A ripple moved through the tiered seats, not the assent of formality, but something closer to the sound institutions make when they realize the ground has already shifted beneath them. You did not merely win a world today, Dr. Okafor, the elder added, quieter now, almost to herself. You rewrote what this council will require of every species that stands where you are standing now. Mastery was never the only form of readiness. We simply never had cause to learn that until a species young enough to still be humble taught us. Amara Okafor inclined her head, 11 years of doubt finally settling into something steadier, not triumph, but the quiet, hard-won certainty of a door that had opened because someone had finally asked the right question instead of the strongest one.